There's the pass to Leitner. Puts it up. Yes!
And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Cameron Chronicles. I'm your host, Shane Smith, alongside one of our new hosts for next year, men's basketball beat, Max Rego, and sports managing editor. And then alongside our guest here, senior basketball beat and former sports editor, Evan Kolin. And, I'll start this out with, there's nothing much else to say than that the day has finally come. Duke head basketball coach Mike Krzyzewski announces that next season, his 42nd year at Duke will be his last, stepping down, and he'll be replaced by 2010 Duke national champion and longtime assistant coach Jon Scheyer, who will officially take over as the new head coach of the program in April of 2022. And so, look, there's plenty to talk about, with the future of the program under Scheyer and, Coach K's last bid for a sixth national title next year with Paolo Banchero and Mark Williams and company. But as we record here on the night of June 2nd, just hours after Duke has officially announced the news of Coach K's retirement, we just want to take the time, sit back and reflect on the career of the winningest head coach in the history of college basketball. So, I'll just start off by kicking it over to you, Evan. What have been your initial thoughts on what's been stuck out to you the most about Coach K's legacy at Duke?
Yeah, I think what really sticks out most is the fact that you look at sort of the six traditional college basketball blue bloods, the Indiana, UCLA, Kentucky, UNC, all those. And what Coach K's built is so impressive in the fact that he really did it. Obviously Duke had success before he came, but the Duke basketball everyone knows today, it's really all under him. Whereas a lot of these other programs have transitioned between, all-time coaches, Duke and Coach K are sort of synonymous with each other. And the other thing that really stands out to me about Coach K's legacy is really the fact that, all these other schools, they're large state schools that they're powered by, large alumni bases, a lot of funding. And Coach K did this really with a small private school like Duke, to really, for Duke to join the rest of those schools as a national basketball power, it just shows it really just displays how impressive it is that, the empire that Coach K has built.
Yeah, everything you said there, Evan, is completely on the money. To me, honestly, just looking back at, going through Coach K's entire career, reading just everything I could today, a bunch of different news outlets, just seeing how much college basketball changed during his 41 now, it'll be his 42nd year at the helm at Duke. It was a completely different sport back in 1980 when he took over. It's changed so much from four-year players were really the norm back then. You saw guys like Ralph Sampson, Patrick Ewing, even Michael Jordan, arguably probably the greatest player of all time, played 3 years. That just doesn't happen nowadays. Guys only play 1 year. Some guys, even for a time there, would just go straight to high school. Duke had some guys, Sean Livingston comes to mind, who just, not play a year of college, just go straight to the pros. So just seeing how much college basketball changed, but also, one of the constants that was there was Duke and Coach K. And every year kind of, once the calendar shifted to April, you would just see in the Final Four, you would see Duke, you'd see Coach K on the sidelines, you would see all, the Cameron Crazies coming in to whichever city the Final Four was in. Just the way that college basketball has changed. Social media has had a huge impact on that. It's become much more of a popular sport. It was obviously the TV ratings just for basketball in general back in the 80s. The NBA was having a lot of struggles at the time, from what I can understand. And college basketball was a little bit of the same. Just like seeing how it's grown into an entire empire and everything has completely gotten turned on its head. And just seeing how through all that, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, now we're sitting here in 2021 and we're still talking about a Duke team under Coach K, who many people say have a good chance to win a national championship next year. And I would tend to agree with that. That just shows how much the self-belief that he had in his program and the guys that he recruited, how much they believed in his system and his way of coaching. I think that really says a lot to his legacy and his longevity over all these years.
I mean, you mentioned how much the sport has changed, and some people love it, some people hate it, but Coach K has really been an ambassador for change for the majority of his career and been a big part in a lot of the landscape that we see in college basketball today. Both great points. Although, I mean, the thing that sticks out to me has to be the brotherhood. And I think you can look at it in terms of two ways, kind of one, just the brand that Duke's built. I mean, every school around the country has, a little hashtag or motto, to talk about and describe their family atmosphere inside the program. But Duke's brand has just taken off, especially over the last decade. And that same motto, the same theme behind it all is that you go back from, Jay Billis to Matthew Hurt, and everybody in between has played for Coach K. And they all have that connection. And I mean, you see it's coming back just, being around campus, like in the summer when K Academy happens, and you see all these high profile Duke stars back on campus to hang out with guys that were, 20 years away from them at Duke. And, that's one of the things that I think Duke fans should be excited about with Shire, to be a little off topic, but Shire also connects with, back to 15 years of Duke players. And I think that same tradition is going to carry on. But, it's just been outstanding, the family tree of players and coaches that Coach K has built. And, Duke basketball is going to live on for a long time simply because of that. So just to kind of transition here as we reflect, back on Coach K's career, it wasn't all peaches for Coach K's career at Duke. Obviously hired from Army by Tom Butters in the spring of 1980. And although he inherited a great team early on with former number one overall recruit Gene Banks and other talented stars, he really got off to a rough start and, was missing the tournament often in his first, 5 years out of the gate at Duke. I don't know if he would last in this current landscape, but, certainly he stuck it out and Duke stuck it out with him. And that leads us to, him talking or us talking about him now. So I'm kind of interested on your guys' thoughts on really Coach K's first year and the perseverance he had through it.
Well, yeah, sort of bouncing off something that you said, you don't know if Coach K would survive in sort of today's landscape, with the struggles he had early on. And it just goes to show that, when picking a coach, you pick a guy that you believe in and you sort of stick with it. Obviously, there's a chance it still doesn't work out. So eventually you do have to move on. But, we're in sort of an age where people are moving on too quickly from coaches. And, sort of Coach K's early years are sort of the prime example. Obviously, everyone, when you get cut from a sports team, everyone mentions, Michael Jordan didn't make varsity his sophomore year. It's sort of, this is like the prime example for a new coach. Coach K struggled his early years at Duke, and look at him now. I mean, it's really, yeah, it's just the thing that people can look back to when, a coach is not having a great couple first years. The important thing is Tom Butters picked Coach K, he believed in him. And then, there's that the story is, the Duke boosters wanted him gone. And, instead Tom Butters gave Coach K an extension, because he believed in him and he believed he was the right man for the job. And he turned out to be 100% correct. And, so obviously there's a lot of ways that Coach K has impacted people, has impacted the game of basketball. But, that might be one of the most prominent is just the lesson is, if you know your guy, stick with him and see things out.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, what stands out is those first couple of years, going through some of the hardships. I know the first year, Coach K's first year, Duke made the NIT. There were some promising signs. Then the next couple of years, they were below 500, and then the pressure really started to ramp up. I think one of the stories that just sticks out for me, and I think this was talked about on the documentary a couple summers ago about the class that saved Coach K, is the year after he brought in that highly rated recruiting class of 1982, Johnny Dawkins, Jay Billis, Mark Allery, Weldon Williams. Those guys, they in today's day and age, maybe they would have been a top 10 team with the one and done era. But since college basketball was just built on 4-year guys, they had basically no shot. They just were 18-year-olds playing against grown men almost. And I remember they played Virginia, I think, in the ACC tournament, and they lost, I think it was 109-66 from what I can remember. And, I think that the coaching staff and the athletic staff went to dinner after, and the sports information director at Duke at the time, kind of raised his glass and said, "Here's to forgetting tonight." And Coach K kind of cut him off and said, "Here's to never forgetting tonight what happened tonight." And just like seeing that was kind of like the line of demarcation, and everything kind of flipped after that. It flipped to the point where just 3 years later, Duke was in the Final Four for the first time in 8 years, and Coach K was in his first Final Four. They obviously came up a little short against Louisville, but you could tell that the program was in a position where, okay, something is being built here. People, I guess, recognize that. And just seeing how in those early years, he kind of changed the way he recruited, focusing more on specific pools of guys instead of just going after every big name, focusing more on those relationships and just like kind of parlaying that into their freshman year of that great class, that moment in the ACC tournament, going up against Virginia, getting killed, and then just a couple years later being in the Final Four. Just that short span just shows you like how quickly things can change if a program, has the right guy and, has that sort of self-belief that I talked about earlier.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about the culture shift and having people buy in. And I mean, that'll just springboard our discussion into the next part of his career. And, people can point to Wooden's, run of championships, back in the day, but in my eyes, with the way that college basketball had shifted in the mid to late 80s and going into the 90s, it was one of the peak eras of college basketball. And in my opinion, it was the most dominant run by a program from 86 to 94, where Duke comes in and makes 6 Final Fours in 8 years. And goes to the championship 4 times, wins 2 of them. It was just a run of dominance. And of course, there was a little hiccup in the mid 90s with Coach K, leaving with his with a back injury, and then he was able to come back in the 1999, 2000s, then a stretch with JJ Redick up to 2006. I mean, just plain and simple, it's one of the most impressive coaching runs in the history of any sport relative to competition, in my opinion. And that is the golden era and always will. I don't think it can ever be replicated. It is the golden era of Duke basketball. And I kind of just want to hear you guys' thoughts on what stood out to you most about that time.
Yeah, I mean, from a Duke perspective, that kind of run, that run you talked about from 86 to 94, if a program did that, 6 Final Fours in that amount of time, I don't think it would be an almost impossible feat. I mean, if a team like Gonzaga did that, or Baylor, or some of the teams that have been in contention the last couple of years for a national title, they would gain so much credibility as a program. And just seeing just that resume for that amount of time, and really just one, like you said, Shane, like just that one kind of almost break. Coach K had some back issues, and then right back to winning. Almost won it in '99, won it again in 2001. Just that consistent, like just churning out 30-win seasons, different guys. Like got 10 years later, 30 wins. Another 10 years later, still putting up 30 wins. Just seeing all the different playing styles that guys had. They would have a team with Christian Leitner, a guy who could score from the high post. They would have a team where JJ Redick, a guy who they would just run around screens around the perimeter, scoring 35 a game sometimes. That would be their best way to score. They had teams where you had John Shire, Nolan Smith, and Kyle Singler just kind of sharing, those three guys kind of carrying the load offensively. Just seeing the different types of teams that all those Duke teams, kind of were defined as. Just you can't really put them in their own little box. They're all extremely different, and yet the result was almost always the same.
Yeah, sort of similar to what you were just talking about, just that run from the late 80s up until, really up until maybe that one and done era, just the ability to find guys. And, none of these guys were number one, number two recruits. They were all good recruits, but they weren't, the top few each year. But the way you just found the perfect guys to develop a system around, in each of those sort of mini runs there, whether it was, Johnny Dawkins, Jay Billis, that recruiting class, then transitions, right to, Bobby Hurley and Leitner, and then to the 90s, Battier and those teams, then right to Redick. I mean, just the ability, you mentioned these are all different teams, different offenses, and the perfect ability to find guys that he knew he could build around and to develop sort of the perfect systems to build around those guys. Shane talked about it. It's among the most impressive feats because, college is different from pro sports. After 4 years, your guys are automatically gone. So the ability to keep up that sustained success over time with all those different players, I have to agree. It's probably the most impressive, one of the most, if not the most impressive, coaching runs in sports history.
I mean, the thing is, too, Coach K just always seemed to have that guy waiting in the wings to step up. And I mean, it wasn't like he was bringing in classes that had, 3 or 4 outstanding guys after that 1986 class. It was like, the 1985 class graduates and suddenly, oh, Tommy Amaker steps up. And then next thing Danny Ferry stepped up the year before that. And then here's Christian Leitner ready to step up as Ferry's leaving, and Hurley steps up a year later, and Hill, and there's literally always just one guy getting ready to go. And it's just such an impressive run of development. It's something obviously we don't see today. And, where I left off and where Evan, you left off with that 2010 championship, Duke shifts into the one and done, starting with the recruitment of Kyrie Irving, who they get for the 2010-11 season. He, of course, leaves after 1 year to become the number 1 overall pick. And it shifts into this final era of Duke basketball. I mean, do you guys give K credit for the switch? Was it something he was forced into? I mean, it just seemed like such a change in his philosophy at the time, and something, I mean, he didn't really expect Irving to be this one guy dash and you're the number 1 overall pick. I mean, how much credit do you give him for that?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely just shows his versatility. Obviously, 2011 is sort of, people look at as the first year because of Kyrie, because it was post 2010 title, but even, you look at 11, 12, 12, 13, it wasn't dominated by one and dones, I guess. It's sort of 2014, 2015. It was sort of, every single year, just a new team, completely constructing, a roster around these new guys that are coming in. Just the ability to sort of change that quickly, I guess, is the thing that stands out most to me. Because he just won the 2010 title with a completely different roster. And this wasn't like a slow transition where like, he had one or two freshmen for a few years, still the upperclassmen were the leaders. He went straight from, 2010, John Shire, Nolan Smith, Kyle Singler, all upperclassmen, all sort of developed, since 2007. It was sort of a unique era in Coach K's time in that, it didn't, he didn't go straight from, the JJ Redick years to more success. He sort of had to build with that new recruiting class, and to go straight from that into, all right, now I'm getting a new roster year in and year out, and to win the title by 2015. I think just the ability to not just transition, but to transition so quickly is what stands out most to me.
Yeah. And, the thing for me is just the fact that all those one and dones that came in since that 2010 title team, Coach K often had to mix and match with a lot of still guys who were, role players who were sticking around for 3-4 years. Guys like Matt Jones, Marshall Plumlee. I know his older brother. I could mention his older brothers, but I wouldn't consider them to be role players. Mason was obviously an All-American. But yeah, those types of guys, just mixing and matching, the Jason Tatums, the Marvin Bagleys, the Zion Williamsons, RJ Barrett, just mixing and matching those guys with some of your more experienced players and still, molding a team that most years was one of the, toss up, 10 teams that people said at the beginning of the tournament, Duke is one of the 10 teams that can win the national title. That was basically said every year for the last 10 years since 2010. And, obviously Duke didn't win every year, much less half the years, but they were always in with a chance. They have the most tournament wins along with Kentucky in the one and done era. So I think that's post 2010. Since Kentucky and Duke Kentucky kind of embraced it first, and then Duke kind of came along after. So just, seeing those two programs kind of work side by side once, both were fully committed to that kind of strategy, just mixing and matching guys and still putting together, stellar teams is really something that speaks to, like you said, Evan, just Coach K's versatility and his ability to adapt. And that's kind of what sets him apart from a lot of great coaches from this era and other eras of college basketball and other sports. That's, for me, that's what puts him in that next category of legendary status, is his ability to change.
And I mean, it's not like K was not recruiting these top guys. I mean, Nolan Smith and Kyle Singler, and JJ Redick and Lou Walton, all these guys were top recruits. It's just kind of that the circumstances changed. And I give K all the credit in the world for making the full switch. Because look, Duke ran into that 2011 season where you're returning a couple stars and Nolan Smith and Kyle Singler, and you're pairing them with Kyrie Irving. And then maybe you had a couple more years of that in 2013 and 2012, where you're pairing returning stars with these top incoming one and done recruits, and it works so well only for a while. I mean, slightly off topic, but I think Gonzaga is a perfect example of what Duke was going through a decade ago. Gonzaga, has one of the best teams in the country last year when they pair some returning guys like Corey Kispert and Drew Timme, established guys, with a big one and done in Jalen Suggs. And what are they going to do next year? They're going to do the same thing and pair Chet Holmgren, the number one recruit, with returning guys like Drew Timme again. But you got to manage in college. You certainly got to manage the egos and expectation of guys. And for only so long are you going to be able to develop talent for multiple years and pair them in with top recruits coming in. And I think Coach K did a fabulous job of that. And in 2014, Duke had a rough year with Jabari Parker, Rodney Hood, and then a whole bunch of below average role players, if we're being fair. And that's the moment I think that he realized that, Duke is not going to, be able to develop guys and bring in top prospects. You just have to bring in bigger classes and fully embrace the one and done. And from that moment forward, we've seen, the classic Coach K class of, 5 or 6 5-stars who are going to come in immediately and make an impact. And I'll give him all the credit in the world for making that switch. And while it only produced one championship, it pushed Duke to being a championship contender every year. But as I mentioned, it only produced one championship. So I think it's only fair that we sit here and say, with all the big name, talents that Duke's had, Jason Tatum, Zion Williamson, Marvin Bagley, et cetera, did K underachieve with this talent over the last decade of his career? I'll throw it over to you first, Evan.
Yeah, I know you're definitely going to disagree on this one, Shane, with my take. I definitely think he did disagree. I did sort of not disappoint, but let me underachieve, as you said, with this talent to some degree. Not in terms of the championship specifically, because that's just so many games in a row in a tournament, but specifically, with the Final Fours. 2015 being the only championship is not something you can be like, oh, he underachieved, you only won one title. But I think with that being the only Final Four, with all the talent he's at, I think it's definitely underachieved to a certain extent. I don't think it's a stain. I mean, he made Elite Eights, he won ACC championships. So he had success with these teams. But I will say one Final Four with all the talent he's had, especially, when you consider the fact that, specifically those 2016, 17 and 2017, 18 teams, the Tatum year and the Bagley year were kind of pretty disappointing regular seasons. And also, the Tatum year, getting bounced in the round of 32. I think when you take that into account, I think it's hard to say he didn't underachieve, but that's not to say that it wasn't a successful, final few seasons, but I just think it's tough to say that he didn't underachieve when you take, those disappointing regular seasons and the fact that they only made one Final Four into account.
The one Final Four is probably the most compelling part of the case you made, Evan. I'm going to have to side with Shane here, though. I do think the last 10 years was one of the toughest eras to coach in, really, in college basketball history, just with how recruiting has changed and with how AAU has had a huge impact. And just seeing how, I think to kind of boil it down, what Coach K did by embracing one and dones is he just raised Duke's ceiling, I guess, if that makes sense. The teams may not have put it together at every point, and during the tournament, they may not have put it together when it really mattered, like at the end of the season. But having that collection of talent, when they put it all together, 2015, when you saw the 2019 team put it all together, I don't think a lot of people will argue that 2019 team, when it was clicking, that it wasn't the best team in the country. They just happened to run into a Michigan State team that matched up with them pretty perfectly. And then it happened to be another great team that Duke beat twice in the regular season. Virginia won the national title. And that's no slight to Virginia. They were a great team. They were a deserving champion that year. But I think if you look at those Duke teams at their ceiling, at their best, And that's kind of what, in college basketball, you just want to kind of peak at that right time. Coach K was kind of banking on this collection of talent will pay off at the right time. And in 2015, it did. And in some other years, it didn't. And that's honestly, that's kind of the luck of the draw with 18 and 19-year-old kids, guys who are in a year are going to be oftentimes expected to take the keys of an NBA franchise. And a lot of guys are just not ready for that. And it's not their fault. It's legitimately like, how can you tell a guy a year out of high school basically to not only carry a team to a Final Four, but also, hey, here's an NBA team, go take this team to the playoffs. So I think he raised this, by embracing all the one and done strategies, I think he just raised Duke's ceiling. And whether that paid off at the right time, it paid off really well once, and at other times it paid off at different points in the season. It just maybe didn't happen to be at the time that would have led to a championship, if that makes sense.
I mean, that's an interesting perspective, because when you first started bringing it up, I almost disagreed, saying that it increased Duke's floor. I don't know. I think that a lot, just having way more talent. Like I'm not gonna say that like the Duke teams of 2001 and 92 weren't on par with in terms of talent, but I mean, you look at a team like 2017 or even like a below average Duke team like 2016, like having that much talent in these top 10 players, it keeps Duke in every game. And I almost feel like the ceiling is always going to be limited just because of how much time they have to develop. But I don't know. It's an interesting perspective. I'm firm believer that Coach K did not underachieve with the talent he got. Duke was a championship contender in all years of the one and done, except for arguably 2014 and obviously last year when they failed to make the tournament. But it's been a crazy run of success, and he'll have one more crack at it next year with what I believe is one of his stronger one and done teams and more complete with returning talent and high level incoming recruits. But, just to put a bow on this whole thing, as we've been reflecting on the career of Mike Krzyzewski, just want to ask you guys both straight up, what do you think was the biggest moment of Coach K's Duke career?
Yeah, I can start off. We were just talking about the one and done, and I know I said I thought he underachieved a little bit overall, but I still think that 2015 title, showing that he can have success with the one and dones when it was such a stark contrast to what he had done for already, 3 decades. And he wasn't just, one of the typical coaches who just had 4-year guys. Duke was known as, because people had been leaving early for a little bit prior to 2010, 2011, but Duke was known as, these guys stay 4 years, they graduate for the most part. Obviously, some guys had left early, but it's, that 2010 team I was talking about, made up of, 4-year guys, 3-year guys that ended up staying for a 4th year. Coach K was not just along, with these other coaches and guys didn't leave early. Duke was known as the place, especially where guys stayed. And for him to win a title so quickly in such a stark contrast to what he and Duke had been known for decades, again, I mentioned it just shows his versatility, and it really should, that's the leading case for why Coach K is perhaps the greatest coach in basketball and sports history. Is not just the success he's had, the Final Fours, the championships. It's winning championships and making Final Fours in different eras and in different ways, and that's what that 2015 title is all about. And that's why I think that's the biggest moment that sticks out, because there's been other coaches, Bob Knight, who won in his own way and then couldn't win when it was a new era. But Coach K, that 2015 title, it shows. Even if, again, I think he may have underachieved as a whole with all the talent he may have had over the last 5-10 years. but it shows that he can and he did have success, with this new kind of roster construction.
That's a really good one. That 2015 team really, if Duke is unable to win a national title in his final season, that 2015 team is obviously going to carry a lot of weight for Coach K's legacy. For me, it's not even something that has to really do with Duke, although obviously we go to Duke, we cover Duke athletics. For me, it's the Olympic gold medals. Just the fact that it's kind of like three or four like different aspects to it. The fact that Coach K went to Army, was active duty after graduating. He's talked multiple times about how much it means to him to have represented his country in the Olympics, and just like wearing that American flag on your chest obviously means a ton to him. And seeing 3 gold medals, that's not obviously didn't take the court obviously, but he still had a role in that. And seeing him, having there's just pictures. I see pictures of Coach K next to Kobe and LeBron and Kevin Durant and Dwayne Wade. Just like seeing that collection of basketball kind of royalty almost in different ways. Coach K obviously from the coaching, from the sidelines, those guys obviously on the court, but just seeing how it all came together with Coach K having the chance to coach the best players in the world in front of the global stage and representing the United States just really stands out for me. And just three different gold medals, and just like taking USA basketball. And obviously there was like, don't get me wrong, they were going to win, but they did struggle in 2004. They won the bronze, which everyone was calling that team a national disgrace and all that. But they trusted Coach K to be the guy to take USA basketball back to what they wanted from the dream team. And obviously they had some really good players. But to this day, really, Coach K has a great relationship with a lot of those guys, and I think that's built off those Olympic teams. And he has a great relationship with LeBron. He had a great relationship with Kobe. He has a great relationship with a lot of those guys. So I think that really stands out. And again, that just goes to the totality of the resume. Like I was writing a column today about just his overall resume, and like I just almost forgot, like, oh, the Olympic medals, that's a huge deal. And just like so much stuff gets left out. But I think for me, that just looking back on everything, that one really, really has a big piece in the entire poster board kind of.
Yeah, I would love to see him, especially continue with an advisory role alongside Grant Hill with USA Basketball. But I think for me, I think the most obvious one that stands out is the semifinal win in 1991, Duke and UNLV. I mean, it was just like the storylines were all there. And I mean, you got a Duke program that has just had this national reputation of like, hey, pretty good program going back a long way, but they just cannot get it done on the big stage. I mean, Vic Bubas tried, Bill Foster tried, Kay was on his third try at this point, and you suddenly run into a UNLV team who's undefeated. Duke had just lost to them by 30 in the national championship just a year prior, and Duke goes up against this team. It's a flawless game plan. They play with zero fear, and you end up giving it to the greatest player in the history of the program, Christian Laettner, with free throws to ice the game. And it gets Duke over that hump, and they win the championship 2 days later. And the lasting image, what I still think is the most iconic image in Duke basketball, is Thomas Hill holding up the poster that has UNLV Dynasty crossed out, and under it says Duke Destiny. And it wasn't a championship game. It was just the final hump, and it completely took off this Duke program. to, incredible heights. And, as we sit here and I'll try to wrap up, is that, I there's so much to talk about in a 40+ year career of Coach K. I mean, there's just stories upon stories and moments upon moments. I mean, actually today I just read an article I'd never heard about of Duke in 1992, a year later against Clemson, and they had just beaten Clemson by 39 a couple weeks before in Cameron, and they're playing on the road. This is a team with Grant Hill, Bobby Hurley, Christian Laettner, and they're losing by 16 at Clemson with like 11 minutes to go in the first half. And Coach K just said, whatever. And he took out Hurley, Hill, and Laettner, and Brian Davis, and Thomas Hill, and just put in like Eric Meek in the bench. And the bench just like kicked it into another gear and brought them all the way back in the game. And then, the starters came back in and took it from there. It's just so many stories about Coach K that a lot of us our age wouldn't know, and that there's just not enough time to talk about it on a podcast like this. But hopefully we'll be bringing we'll certainly be bringing the Coach K retirement content for this foreseeable future at DukeChronicle.com. And for Max Rego and Evan Kolin, I'm Shane Smith. Have a good night.